And the entire audience said, not staying here very long. See you later, James. Welcome, everybody, to the Historic Preservation Commission on January 10th, 2019. We have a new person with us, Suzanne Riegel. Suzanne is, go ahead, Suzanne. Why are you here?
I'm here filling in for Luke Connolly, the Community Development Director. He's out of the office and asked me to represent the Community Development Department tonight. I've been a full-time planner since June, so I'm here if you have questions, and Matt can cover the more substantive questions on the agenda.
This is Suzanne's first Historic Preservation
That is
Commission
correct.
meeting. We were talking, I don't know, last week maybe, I'm not sure. So anyway, thank you for being here. Mr. Summers, welcome back.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Nice to have you here. Yes, please.
Chair Akins,
Here.
Vice Chair Quinn,
Here.
Commissioners McCready,
Present.
James,
Here.
Convery,
Here.
McCatton, DuPoit not in attendance at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. If we could do the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'd please stand with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Little League baseball season's almost here, so you can't get there from there, Elise. So next thing I hear after the pledge is always play ball. Those are happy words. Public communications, members of the public wishing to address the Historic Preservation Commission on items appearing on the agenda are requested to complete a speaker's card and file it with the secretary. Cards are available in the council chambers lobby. All comments should be limited to 3 minutes unless additional time is granted by the chair. Speakers should state their name and address for the record and must direct their comments to the chair, not the audience or press. While the Historic Preservation Commission is in session, members of the commission, city staff, and members of the audience are expected to maintain order and decorum and to obey the orders of the chair. At this time, I see we have Museum Representative Mark Lewis. Mark, what do you have to share for us this evening?
Thank you, Chair Akins, commissioners, staff. Since I last stood before you, we observed an extraordinary event, almost as rare as Halley's Comet flashing through the sky, even more rare because it will never happen again. They finally installed Doug Lochner's gates at the museum. I think a number of you were there for the unveiling. The mayor cut the ribbon, etc. If you haven't been there, please do come by and see and touch them and know that they're real. They're installed. It's over. And the HPC, of course, had a lot to do with the long process that led from the drawing board into the reality. So we at the museum appreciate what you all have done, and as well as your colleagues at the Arts Commission and City Council. So, and certainly Councilman Wyrick, who happens to be here, played a very key role in this as well, and we appreciate that. It is my honor to remind you or point out that you are sharing this chamber today, as well as part of your hallway, with the artwork of one of Ojai's most fantastic artists, extraordinary, a woman of talent, a history in arts. So the fact that she's my mother Listen to it. Karen K. Lewis is the current, just opened, painting there behind Commissioner Convery, and one over here, Artichokes, I think it is. And also at the museum, since we are partnering with you folks and have concurrent exhibits, and this just went up, it'll be up through the 16th. The public reception will be at the museum a week from tomorrow on Third Friday, when we stay open as part of the downtown Third Friday. We also will have an unrelated poetry reading, just because we pack everything we can into Third Friday. And y'all come by and check it out. And by the way, if you haven't seen our Trial by Fire exhibit, basically the Thomas Fire, but also some of the other historic fires that almost destroyed the town in the course of the last 101 years, it will come down on the 27th. So come on by on Third Friday and see that too, because it's up until January 27th. The next major rotating exhibit that we will put up in February, I'll tell you about in more detail at your next meeting, but it will, it is Ceramics show, which is being curated by Kevin Wallace, who heads the Beatrice Woods Center for the Arts, and Richard Flores, who does education for the Beto Center and is also a member of the Ojai Studio Artists. This is not an OSA event, it's Ceramics in Ojai event, and more details to come. But that'll be the next major rotating exhibit that will happen in, I think, mid-February. Again, more next time I come here. And I think that's all. Any questions?
Nope.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, the next item of business on the consent calendar are the minutes of December 13th, 2018. Any adjustments or changes?
I don't recall under number 2, I just don't recall that I said I would contact staff to get something on the agenda under number 2. The reception. If I said it, I said it. I don't think it's my role to contact staff.
I wasn't here by that chance. I was still racing up the 101, the 33, going very slow up Creek Road, I want y'all to know, okay? Very slow up Creek Road. Not something that's habitual for me, so I'm trying to improve. So any other comments?
Yeah, there's a spelling error. Fourth paragraph of item 3, second line, it should be intend instead of intent.
Oh, let's see. Which paragraph? are we in?
Right here.
Oh, intend, does not intend.
It says Commissioner McCatton is not in support of using HPC's budget to obtain historic resources survey on a building, and the city does not intend, it should read.
Great. That was a visitation from Pat Clark Dorter for
I was going to say.
those of you that have been around for a while. Thank you, Darwin. We miss you, Pat. Okay, any other changes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes with change and then a verification for Elise's comment? Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. Thank you all very much. Okay, now moving on to discussion item number 2. Still on the minutes. There we go. Okay, discussion item number 2 is update on ordinance amending the cultural and historic preservation ordinance of the Ojai Municipal Code, sections 4-8.01 through 4-8.23, as prepared by the ad hoc committee. I believe Suzanne has a staff report for us.
Briefly, the last ordinance updated that was prepared by the ad hoc committee was presented to the city council on September 25th. It was referred back to the ad hoc committee to make some additional changes. The ad hoc committee did meet in November and December and made some additional changes. That is attachment B to the staff report. The ad hoc committee requested that, as a courtesy, it be brought back before the Historic Preservation Committee, just so that you had a chance to review it and comment. No formal action will be taken tonight, but the item will go back to council for review of the ordinance following this meeting.
Mr. Summers, do you have anything to add, since you were intricately involved in this process over the last several years?
That I have. It's been a long process, but I think we got a good result here, and I think the ad hoc committee's additional edits are well taken. What's before you, I won't go through them all in detail, but the gist of them overall is to clarify, strengthen, in some cases simplify, and add more detail to the definitions to help ensure the terms that are in common use or terms that are in use among the city and among the staff are evident to someone who's simply picking the ordinance up and is starting from scratch. It maintains the same basic structure as before. It maintains the one key element that's new relative to this ordinance as opposed to the current one, which is dividing out work permits, dividing them into two, major and minor work permits. That is maintained but clarified with the ad hoc committee's edits. And it also, of course, adds a direct allowance for ordinary repair and maintenance with a definition thereof that's further clarified. And I'm available for any particular questions. And as is Mr. Walker and Councilmember Wyrick, who are both in the ad hoc committee, also present.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you, Mr. Summers. I do not have any speaker cards. If we had a speaker card out there, would we have speakers? Okay.
Craig here, I think Craig will follow. Yeah, really the idea was
Councilman
to
Wyrick.
take, thank you, was to take the intent and the vision, and I think Mr. Summers pretty much clarified, pretty much summarized, the whole idea was to make this as workable as possible, but also to plug some holes. For example, we had no specific protection for the structure of merit category, which we defined and included as something separate from landmarking, but nevertheless something we haven't had before, which I think all of us felt was a hole. And something that I kind of pointed out is that many of these types of ordinances have a demolition by neglect provision. And when I think we all, after we talked about it, felt that was very important as well, so that we didn't have people saying, okay, fine, you want to protect this, I'll show you. I just won't take care of it, and that has happened historically in other locations. So we went through, with an emphasis on, as I summarized, just a little bit more from Mr. Summers, emphasized the preservation of character-defining elements. Also, before I go any further, I want to give a shout out for Elise, who assumed the mantle of secretary and honest broker to us all and did a fabulous job in helping to keep everything organized and focused. So you put a lot of hours in, and I appreciate it very much. We all should. And but specific procedures for structures of merit and points of historical interest were added. We also reviewed the functions and powers of the commission and added some precision and clarity. I think that we eliminated some loopholes and inconsistencies, still have clear and fair procedures, and I'm ready to advocate as strongly as possible to my colleagues that this is what we should adopt. So
Great. Thank you, Councilman Wyrick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
I'm Craig Walker. I was on the commission when we originally started this process, and I was served on the committee with Terry Hill and Rose Boggs and Matt and Kathleen Wold, I believe, was also on the committee. And it was a long process back then, and then I left the commission, and then this group carried it forward and made a lot of improvements to it. And I agree with Mr. Summers that I think having this one last look at it to kind of plug some holes and give some internal consistency. I think it also gives this commission a louder voice in commenting on a lot of the reports, historic reports that go through the city that you never get a chance to see. I think now you'll be able to at least look at those and comment on them. And anyway, I just want to thank you for all your hard work on it as well, and the commissioners that were part of the process.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Any other comments from the public? Okay, we'll close public comments. Okay, so last night going through multiple years of agendas. 1, 2. 6, 7, 8. There we go. There's some extras here. So last night I went through this. So we've talked about what the path was, the number of meetings we held. So I went through all of the agendas since that are online, which start with January 2015. Why don't you gentlemen may want to enjoy this too? You have a printout? How do you have a printout of this?
I have a printout of the clean copy. No, I haven't.
No, ha, we're not there yet. This is a timeline.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. Well, you know, these things take time.
Yeah. So if you look through this, you'll see the number of meetings that were held from initial thing, December 14th. You'll see on that second page kind of the dashed line that goes across. That's when it left the historic preservation purview and went to the city council meeting purview. You can see that that took some time. You can see when the presentations were made to the city council. There was an initial presentation that took place May 22nd, and then it was a long time before it came back to a subsequent reading. At that time also, there were individuals who came before the council on July 10th and had issues with what was presented to the by the Historic Preservation Commission to the City Council. So you can see those discussions all the way through. I just wanted to get an idea of exactly how much time we've spent on these little 16 pages. It's been interesting. I just want to add to the summary that Mr. Summers presented and Councilman Wyrick presented. I will say that I think people know I was not a fan of how this was handled in the city council. We had an ad hoc committee, just to remind people who were members of the ad hoc committee. They were Councilman Wyrick, former HPC chair Darwin McCready, who had been the chair through all those long years. Community Development Director Luke Connolly, Craig Walker, who just spoke, Elise DePoit, who was, by the time of the ad hoc committee, was a member of the Historic Preservation Commission, and myself. After the first meeting that we had and going into the second meeting, my thought process on this whole procedure was that we were making lemonade out of lemons. And I freely shared that opinion with people who approached me, asking me what was going on with it. Again, in agreement, I felt like this is more conservative, as leaning towards protection. As I said, it addresses structures of merit. Councilman Wyrick brought that up. Just for a point of interest, as Commissioner McCready knows oh so well, because it was his number one with a bullet, we did bring up structures of merit in every meeting that the commission held and every meeting that we held with the city council in a joint meeting. Isn't that correct, Mr.? So Other things that we had requested in the past were that the historic resources reports that somehow end up going to other commissions but never make it by the Historic Preservation Commission, that they be run by us. And so that, I believe, has been added, so a very nice touch. I think Councilman Wyrick hinted at this. There are more punitive actions that will be taken towards somebody who, I didn't know I could tear down that landmark. Well, there is punitive measures that are included in this. It also went further. When I'm doing this, just as people know, you can see all the meetings we held. I'm pretty sure that most of these meetings didn't have the same people in it that the prior meeting had. And so in all of these meetings we were holding, there was a amalgamation of members of the commission, but not the full commission. So coming up with the document that we presented to the council, thank you to Mr. Summers for putting our terms together, but coming to an agreement with members of the commission who were sometimes not at one or another, it is a work. So there's a compromise amongst the commissioners in coming up to a joint thing. And also as we were going through this process in trying to anticipate based on meetings with the city councilmen, we met in these 4 years. We met with them 3 out of the 4 years. Somehow we missed, I think, 2016. I double-checked every 6 o'clock meeting that was held by the city council, and we weren't there. And also, so in putting these together, we were trying to anticipate what would pass the city council. One thing to keep in mind on the document that we have in front of us is it was put together by the ad hoc committee. They were led by Councilman Wyrick. Again, the individuals you saw, the ad hoc committee met every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, generally. Each week, same people there pretty much each week. We had the benefit, because we were not a commission, to be able to email each other and exchange information on a ready basis. That helped. And the other thing to keep in mind is this is going to be at some time, I don't know that there's a date certain for it yet, but at some time presented to the city council. So this is not an approved document by the city council. This, again, is a suggestion to the city council by the HPC and then built upon by the ad hoc committee. So as you go through it, hopefully you've had the time to go through and look at the red line. You can see that where the changes were made and where the current document that we submitted to the city council are included. As again was said, in some places it's more general and less specific. There was a big push on whether this adheres to the Secretary of State standards. I heard that multiple times in the different meetings that we held at the city council. This meeting is, I think if you look at the early part, it says that the city council, the city will adhere to the Secretary of the Interior standards unless there is an overriding local need to adjust it in some way. So that's one of the things that's a part of the early paragraphs. But again, the thought is to stick with the Secretary of the Interior standards and let that jive.
Is that for both designation and building standards, or just building standards?
I don't know what you mean by designation.
Like designation of a landmark or a historical district, Secretary of the
Yeah, I think it's for both of them. Let's see. So there are things in there that are contrary to the Secretary of the Interior standard. The one thing of which, of course, I'm guilty on is the fact when we did the Terramina Historic District, they had the rules in there that basically said if you own 6 parcels, you get 1 vote. If you and your spouse jointly own 1 parcel, you each get a vote. And as part of our discussion, I suggested that it was 1 parcel, 1 vote. So if you own 6 parcels, you get 6 votes. We adopted that. However, when it was sent to the California Historic Preservation Office, she said no. However, the ad hoc committee has included that. I believe I'm correct in that. Thank you, Councilman Wyrick. So there were things in there that the ad hoc committee kept as was. It has more involvement, more recommendations, and more approvals, as in permits, by the Historic Preservation Commission. So our responsibility has, I think, been increased and recognized in this. Interesting enough, section 4-8.06, in talking about landmarks, again, these are recommendations that are being made to the city council, is not just for landmarks within the city of Ojai boundaries, but also within the sphere of influence. And Councilman Wyrick, can you define that again for me, what the sphere of influence is, please? I tried to, and I got it wrong at that meeting.
There is an agency called the Local Agency Formation Council.
The local agency.
Formation.
The Local Agency Formation Commission.
Local Agency Formation Commission. It is established by state statute. And what it does is define around every incorporated city 2 additional territories, if you will. One is a sphere of influence, which really kind of boils down to a designated service or natural service area. It's almost pre-approved for annexation if we ever want to do it.
Yeah, the sphere of influences are designed to be the area in which the city would logically expand upon its full build-out
Right.
or upon its natural growth.
Right. And whether we do it or not, it also, by LAFCO designation, puts more of a burden on the county to respect the city's planning priorities within that sphere of influence than outside it. They're actually supposed to coordinate with us. And so this language allows us to have an agreement with the county, in effect, that we could set up where they would basically defer to us, and if we could negotiate where they could basically allow some jurisdiction of the city in the sphere of influence. And there's a separate thing called an area of interest, which is outside of that, where it's not so much of a burden on the county to coordinate with the city. They're just supposed to hear our concerns. But there's an intent inside the sphere of influence for the county to specifically coordinate with the city. And if I'm misstating, I'm sure I'll be corrected.
The key is that in the sphere of influence, the county, and in the course of exercising its land use power, meaning the ability to approve development, has to take into account whether that development is or is not consistent with the city's general plan, particularly if the city's general plan has already been amended to include the sphere of influence,
Right.
as is sometimes the case in some spheres of influence. It doesn't mean that the county in the end remains land use power until we annex, but they have to consider our consistency with the city's general plan in the sphere of
Gives us
influence area.
a little, this language gives us a little bit more standing as we develop our general plan, and possibly even get an outright, maybe a cooperative agreement with them, where they would allow this commission to have some authority outside of the city limits.
Great, thank you very much, Councilman Wyrick and Mr. Summers. So again, so if somebody comes to you and you're like, well, wait a second, that's outside the city limits, well, we may have a route to actually to consider it for landmarking.
But can you actually make it part of the city's land?
No.
Not without annexation. And one of the key things in terms of the areas in the sphere of influence and in the area of interest, if the city has taken the action to designate it a landmark or designated a point of interest, then even though it won't have the same protections as it does in the city, should the county consider a proposal to modify it or demolish it as part of the CEQA process, they would have to consider its historic status. And it would be difficult to find exempt and not consider an EIR for a project that the city had designated as a landmark with associated documentation of its historic status. It raises the barrier for the county to develop or demolish. Even if we don't directly, the vote to approve the permit still would go to the county, but it creates greater protection than would otherwise exist.
Great, thank you both very much. We may have a little bit of conflict of interest with Commissioner McCready over there to our right, since he's also on the county cultural heritage.
And, for what it's worth, ideally, we would work together.
Of course. All through Darwin over there. Another thing, section 4-8.11 talks about the use of city funds. So if there's some type of item that we feel wants to be landmarked, but there There may be a case that we could go to the city and say, hey, we think you could purchase this, and so that's an option. Whether it happens or not, who knows, but it's still an option that's been included in there. 4-8.13 talks about structures of merit. Again, we've talked about structures of merit in our many meetings and in the council meetings, and there is a lot of added language that talks about the protection for them, almost to the degree as though they were a landmark, but of course they're not. The key thing to keep in mind, you'll appreciate me doing this, Councilman Wyrick, is just to remind all of us that there are no council-approved structures of merit at this time. So if you're reading through this and you're getting all excited, just remember where it says approved structures of merit. So we'll be working on we may be working on the council to get some of those done. Again, they mentioned clarification of work permits, took out items that were duplicative. And so overall, again, I go back to my feeling that lemonade has been made out of lemons. I see in this, again, knowing the people that were in the ad hoc committee, people that I have deep respect for, I was pleased to see that it went in a direction that I had hoped and anticipated. And so me personally, I'm happy with how it turned out. So at this time, I will open it for discussion by other commissioners.
I have some comments.
Yes, Commissioner Convery.
What I just, first thing is I wanted to address your comment about the one vote per parcel. And I think, and I know that the reason why that was disagreed upon from the California, was it California Historical Commission that you said, is because what's happened in the past in certain valuable neighborhoods, a developer will come in and start buying up houses and buying up parcels, and people don't really know it. And then when the community or the town finds out, that person has amassed, enough property to change the neighborhood, knock them down, build McMansions and that kind of thing. So one of the ways to stop that from happening is to designate a landmark status, and if that said developer, the imaginary developer, has one vote per parcel, they can vote down the landmark status. So it's a way it actually doesn't encourage preservation to have one vote, to have each person have, the way it is in here, one vote per parcel. It actually can discourage preserving and landmarking a neighborhood. And that's based on precedent, so I didn't know if you were aware of that.
I was not aware of that. I very much
Yeah, so
appreciate
that's
that.
a
I
little
was
bit of a
looking
red
at it
flag.
from
Right.
what looked like visible fairness rather
there's
than.
no such thing, Brian. So I'm sorry, but
I did take ownership for messing that one up.
I want to point out a couple of. I think it's a very good document. It's come a long way, and my point of view and my goal is that preservation should be encouraged by permits, encouraged by cities like Ojai, where it's a valuable commodity. So based on that point of view, on page 7 of the red line, down just almost halfway down, it says, a proposed landmark designation shall not require the expenditure by the city of any amount of public funds not commensurate with the value to the community as a whole of the structure, property, or site. And I think that's a little fraught with danger because the value to the community as a whole is abstract and subjective. And that opens it up to argument. I don't know how to reword that to make it more specific. I don't know if it's possible, but it's very subjective. And on page 7 of 21, almost halfway down. So that was my first comment.
Can I pause you there real
Yeah,
quick?
sure.
So you bring up a valid point on the two different things, but this is coming back to us as solely courtesy for us to be able to read, to be able to look at. If we have suggestions or disagreements, the only route going forward is to take that and speak in public comment at the council meeting.
I just, I want to put it out there and get feedback to see if it's valid, if I'm reading it correctly, et cetera. So, and they're
Thank
very, other than that, they're pretty small. On page 9, and this might be a question for Craig. Why is a point of historical interest crossed out all over the place? Why did you take it out of this declaration of landmarks or historic districts? Did it just get moved? Yeah, I saw it down there later, but I just wanted to clarify that because I wasn't sure about that. So, yeah. So that was a question. I did have another question about page 15, minor work permits that are approved by the Community Development Director. And my concern about that is the Community Development Director in Ojai changes all the time. We've had a lot of Community Development Directors, and many of them come from outside, and they're maybe not as familiar with the historic neighborhoods and so on. So I'm a little concerned that the Community Development Director, if a house in, for instance, the Arbolada or on Foothill Road is in a historic area, but it's not a landmark district, which it isn't, will the Community Development Director even be aware of that when the permit application comes across the desk? It's a little, the major work permits have to come in front of us, but the minor work permits, which still affect the character defining elements, might just float along and we wouldn't even see them. I don't know if that's
Could
true.
Mr. Summers is over here
Yeah, can you
itching to
clarify
Yeah,
answer.
I
that?
mean, so
And then we'll go to you, Councilman Wyrick, if you don't.
Certainly,
if that's okay with
The
Commissioner
present text
Comfrey.
proposal what the history is noted by Commissioner Akins, Chair Akins, the present text proposal is that the Community Development Director would be empowered to approve minor work permits. The Community Development Director, hopefully the current one, stays with us for a long time, but if there's a change, as mindful of the history there, each time they're onboarded, they are, among other things, provided with direction by the city manager as to the status of the city and what's the history, what is around. And this proposal would require, for the houses in the Arbolada, of course, they don't need a minor work permit. But they do require, except for the few that are actually landmarked, I should say, but the other non-landmarked houses up there in that historic area, they still require a design review permit for work if it's 2 stories. And that creates the opportunity for the Community Development Director to assess and evaluate historic issues. So I think there's protections built into the existing system, and the risk inherent in the possible change in personnel can be combated by strong institutional memory and strong procedures to ensure that as new people are onboarded, they're brought to given the explanation of what we have.
Hopefully.
And I'll invite further comments from the council.
Councilman Wyrick, please.
Yeah, Commissioner Convery, that in fact was a concern, but there was a desire to try to draw a distinction between minor and major. And one of the protections to address your concern was, first of all, there are specific criteria that the Community Development Director is to follow in the granting of a minor work permit with respect to character defining elements, number one. Number two, that provides the grounds for anyone on this commission to appeal a decision of the Community Development Director.
But we're not made aware of minor work permits.
You will be. That's it.
I read this document that we are made aware of major work permits, but not minor work permits. Is that incorrect?
The minor work permits are a public record, and that's certainly something that I'm going to look at, because under the same spirit of something where I championed, where that you look at all historic preservation surveys. Certainly the minor work permits, the intent all along in our discussion was that that would be reported to this commission.
Yeah, because I don't see all the commissioners going to the city hall every week checking the permits,
Well, it's very
That's
easy
why.
just to simply distribute them. So I will look
Yeah.
at that to make sure there's a procedure for this commission to have the minor work permits simply circulated when approved.
And that can be accomplished through an administrative policy, as is the case for certain species of design review permits at this stage.
Yeah, but it wouldn't hurt to have it explicit in here.
Okay.
When we'll
It
talk
can also
about
be
that.
added, yeah.
So I think that's a good point.
And in that same vein, on page 16, it says an application, it's item 6, page 16 of the red line, an application for a minor work permit may, at the discretion of the Community Development Director, need a historic resources report prepared as required. those resources report are super expensive. They might even cost more than the work that the person is requesting, and that to me discourages preservation. So if there's a minor work permit, and if the community development director decides to require it, I think the city should pay for it. You know, because it'll keep the community, it's a weapon. And I've been subjected to weapons in the code, and I know all about them. And so I don't want to hand a weapon to somebody who could require a report from somebody without.
The original draft, it was required. And so we decided to make it a may, and because and then that decision can also be appealed to the
Yeah,
commission.
and in the original draft, when we discussed it, I mentioned that I thought the city should pay for it if it's required, because it is a weapon. It is a minor work permit. It's, it's a $5,000 ticket generally,
No.
3 to 5. It's expensive. And we had somebody in here a year or 2 years ago, Richard and Mary, who own RTK Tile, and they were being required to do this report.
Yes, inappropriately so.
Yeah, so, it turned out they
There
had to
actually
fight
turned out
back.
that there was no authority in the code for the staff to be requiring that.
It was part of this whole
But
conversation.
you'll never be able to
Let me-
stop
let
that.
me finish here. I'm almost
You'll never
done.
be able to stop staff from acting outside their authority.
Well, I'm not trying to
But there are
stop them
tools that are
out of
helpful on
hand.
the table.
No,
that-
I have the floor, people. So I just wanted to say that I think if you want to address this in a more fair way, and you want to give somebody the authority to require a historic resources report, and it's, loose, the city can pay for it.
My pushback on that is that you're basically, especially for a landmark project, you signed a contract to
Yeah.
maintain with integrity your property, and you are getting a public benefit in terms of a tax break for doing that.
No,
If
only
it's
if you have
landmarked
a
under the
Mills
Mills
Act
Act, if it's
application.
under the Mills
Only
Act.
if you have a Mills
If
Act.
it's
And
under
if
Mills
there
Act,
is a
not-
Mills Act
I said-
application, then you have a historic report already, so it's a moot point.
But my point is that their argument could be that the private property owner is getting a public benefit from this process, from being landmarked, et cetera. They have a responsibility. I'm not sure that the entire responsibility for every historic resources survey in this process should be on the taxpayers. I think that's an issue of debate.
If there is a landmark property that needs a minor work permit, there is a report existing, or it wouldn't be landmarked. It has to have a report.
No, and that's the point, is there already is one existing. It's a question of whether or not.
Why is this language in here then?
Because it was meant to allow, if the discussion, and please the other members of the committee pop in, one of the problems is that the integrity and rigor of some past older historic resources survey has been subject to a fair amount of doubt. And the question is, should it be, if there's some real problems with how they were done in the past, or how the landmark agreement, we know there have been problems with past landmark agreements.
Do you have an example?
I cannot recall them. I just remember some discussion among this commission.
Like
of
the
a
Smith
number of
Hobson
examples.
House, maybe?
And,
Can anyone think of one? I can't think
I
of
think the
one.
idea is to provide a mechanism for maintaining rigor in the process, I think is the motivation. And I think to put everything, to shift the burden entirely and completely, in all cases, on the taxpayers, I'm just not sure. I'm not even sure how you'd budget for that. Anyway, that's just my thought. But I'm listening to what you're saying, but I do think the reporting mechanism, I mean, definitely think about how to word that.
Yeah, it just, it's vague. And I believe that is, those are all my comments. That's it.
Well, thank you very much. I think this is very helpful for people to understand questions that still remain and get answers from people that were involved in doing the ad hoc. Yes.
So the structures of merit, and you mentioned that you want to start looking at them and working with the city to have an approved list for structures of merit. To make
Wish.
To make a structure of merit approved, do we need to run a report on it? And if we run a report on that, it's going to come out of our budget, and then it's going to affect our priority list? Or do you not need a full you need to run a report in order to do a structure of merit, correct? No?
There's, the present ordinance as drafted does not require a historic resource report to designate a point of interest or a structure of merit. It can be designated based on general understanding or community understanding or community evidence, et cetera. The full historic resource report is, of course, required for proposed landmark.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The
Yes,
other-
Commissioner McCready.
The other thing that came up, which the ad hoc committee discussed, was that there is a City of Ojai survey that the community development director, whoever he or she is, has access to and can refer to, and that was urged that they do so when reviewing applications for minor work permits. So that's a valuable tool that the city paid for, and it's got a lot of valuable information in it, and so that did come up in one of the meetings that we had.
Elise, did you have anything you want to bring up? No? Okay. Commissioner Vice Chair Quinn?
Well, I just want to go back to what I've always believed in, is that the homeowners should have a little bit of a say in this, and especially when it comes to not landmarking, but we just talked about it. I'm having a blank here. Structures of merit. So I just hate to see what happened to Richard and Mary, and was as they came in and we discussed it, and I kept saying, there should be a way that we can help them out on this. And they said, well, no, it's out of our purview. And I understand that, but it was a mistake. They were being held up. And I want that to not continue on houses that are not landmarked. I own 2 landmarked properties, and I get it that I said I'm going to do certain things, and I intend to stand by that. But if I hadn't done that, then I don't want somebody from the city to come in and tell me what to do with my property. I still maintain this is a voluntary process. And because we live in a home that was built 100 years ago or whatever, I want it not to be a mandatory thing that if you want to replace the windows or you want to do something to your home, that you have to go through a very expensive process with the city.
Do you mean after it's been landmarked?
No, I mean, when you've not, like Richard
Yeah,
and Mary come
yeah.
into us.
Well, so, and what we discussed and what I'm reading here is that this is only landmark properties,
But we're
right?
talking about structures of, sorry, we're talking about structures of merit also here.
Do s-
And making a list, and what should that they do as they come to it.
I didn't understand this as structures of merit having historical resources required and coming in front of us, just landmarks.
Well, it says that they have certain things to do, and I'm just saying my opinion
Yeah.
about structures of merit and properties that are not landmarked.
I don't think that's a problem right now.
Okay, we'll see. It was for Richard and Mary.
I
so-
know, but it wasn't. They resolved it. It wasn't.
But it was when it was for a long
It
time.
was when it was.
Yeah.
Craig, you were reading my mind, so please come forward and share your thoughts if you would.
Right, there's a whole other area of law that's completely outside of our local law, which is CEQA. And CEQA does require that the city look at historic properties to see whether or not as an environmental issue. And so that's where a lot of these requests for the reports come, because they've checked whatever sources they have available at the city desk. It could be a history book, it could be the survey, it could be whatever they have available to kind of kick out those. This will actually give you more say over it, because if it gives this commission the right to look at those and make a comment on them. So if Mr. Kite's property is required to have one of these reports, then it would come to you first, and you could say, no, this clearly isn't historic. It's nothing that we would be interested in, so as to maybe free him of that burden. So that's a possibility.
Great, thank you, Craig. Yes?
Councilman Blatz had said in one of our meetings that structures of merit, you couldn't enforce any kind of, I don't know how he worded it, but do anybody else recall that?
I believe that was a discussion of the present ordinance.
Oh, the present,
The
okay,
present ordinance has no restrictions on structures of merit.
okay.
Also, as noted, none exist.
Mhm.
This ordinance would impose some additional, not, some additional regulation to structures of merit if and when they are designated. Namely, that demolition by neglect is prohibited, and permits for adjustment or development would have to come to this commission for come to this commission at the director's discretion, and then come permits for demolition or alteration, that is building permits or any other associated permits, would have to come to this commission for review and comment. So the Historic Preservation Commission would not be granted the power to approve or disapprove the permits for structures of merit, but would be granted the power to review and comment on them. One would expect that the building official and the community development director, and if applicable, the planning commission, would take into account the comments of this commission on a designated structure of merit. I believe Mr. Blatz's comment, Councilmember Blatz's comments were regarding the
Previous.
present ordinance,
Okay.
which is still on the books now, which has no regulation of, in that ordinance to use the term sites of merit.
But if there's no historical report on the property, what standard do you use to judge it by exactly?
So with respect to if a structure of merit came forward, and there was not an existing historic resource report on it, then the standard would be, or the evaluation of it would be the other available information that it is or is not historic. So it would be the community's knowledge, the museum's information, the information available to the city, including the facts
Survey.
documented in that survey, and any other available information regarding the property and whether it is or is not historic. And as we well know, is or is not historic is the wrong way to phrase it. Or is a misnomer often used. It's a historic is a bit of a spectrum. You have everything from perfectly preserved, encased in lucite, to a craftsman that's perfectly maintained on the outside, but the inside has been completely gutted, and then shades of gray in between. So it would take into account all available information to be reviewed and considered. And the last point I'll note on the prior issue is, in any time for any project of any permit stripe in which there's a requirement that an applicant or a commissioner or a council member feels is inappropriate with respect to requiring a historic resources survey or a traffic study or something else, that decision made by the director can be appealed. In the context of historic, it would come to this commission. If it's just a regular building permit or regular design review permit, it would go to the planning commission. But those decisions can be appealed, and it's admittedly often a short window, but that is an existing check and a balance that exists to prevent unfortunate situations like that which may have occurred.
Thank you. Councilman Wyrick?
I think this is a great discussion because it raises a larger issue of which Mr. Summers knows of my great concern, and that is CEQA guidelines for review. Right now, we have staff trying and struggling to some degree, no offense, with guidelines coming out from the state level, but without guidance from council in terms of the range of local discretion that council can exercise in the application of these suggested state guidelines. In the absence of council deliberation, staff has sort of felt like they have to go into the range of being careful and maybe putting degrees of burden in terms of CEQA guidelines that, if they had deliberation by council, could be more sensibly applied to our community. I hope I'm making some kind of sense. And certainly I've been pushing for, and I believe we have a date certain now. For
I
doing
confess
some-
I don't have my list of dates in front of me, but it
Yeah.
is on the agenda for the first quarter
Right.
of this year for the council to start the discussion. And the other point to note is that the state has rewritten the statutes that govern the CEQA guidelines, portions of which are less guidelines, more requirements, portions of which are guidelines. Those were rewritten again last year. So we're working on a bill, we are working on a memo on that bill.
But there still is a range of local discretion.
There is a range of local
And
discretion.
that comes up in particular for things of great concern to this commission. For example, do we want to go the way City of Ventura's gone, which pretty much have said, well, if it's more than a certain amount age, that kicks in a requirement for a survey, as opposed to me personally, I think that's not appropriate. It's more appropriate to have some sort of, actual criteria for when surveys are needed to be done, as opposed to if the council does not intervene and does not deliberate on this issue, staff kind of feels like they're forced by the state regs to go with, anything older than 50 years requires a survey. And that's an example of the kind of discretion where I think council needs to get involved, because I think that's a matter of some debate, whether every structure just on the basis of age needs a survey. If it's a discretionary permit, not residential, ministerial, but any discretionary permit. So I know we're getting in the weeds here, but I think this all raises up an important issue. And the intent with the procedure here was to keep this commission in the loop once there had been deliberation in front of council to designate an individual property of structure of merit. So there's first where it's a whole public process to be designated structure of merit in the first place. And if that's accepted by deliberation, then it becomes a matter of making sure this commission's in the loop when something that might affect a character-defining element comes up with that structure. So it's not a blanket deal. It's not an adoption of a list. It's an individual by individual consideration for something added to that classification. So that was the intent, as I understood it. But it also, I thought I'd speak to the larger issue that I can certainly see this commission is going to be involved in. I anticipate.
I would expect.
When we get to the CEQA guideline discussion in terms of defining the range of local discretion and how we feel CEQA guidelines should be applied to this community, that this commission will definitely be involved in that discussion as well.
Great. Thank you, Councilman.
Definition of survey is historical survey, correct? Or is there a different definition to it?
In which
He was
context?
saying that in Ventura, all,
Oh, I think in that context, survey meaning historic resources report.
okay.
Yeah, City of Ventura has defaulted. If you are bringing in a discretionary permit application to the planning, just pretty much any commercial property development, multifamily, et cetera, they look age, and if it's a certain age, you got to go pay for an historic resources survey, no matter what. I don't want to go there.
So it's 40 years on some properties, 50 years on another, and there are also, in some cases, very much involving the HPC, where it's an automatic that it goes to the Historic
Yes,
Preservation
it's an automatic
Commission.
thing. But my contention is that needs to be a council decision whether we're going to make that kind of thing automatic or not. Whereas staff, if council doesn't deliberate, kind of gets pushed in that direction by the state guidelines. And I don't like that personally.
Yeah, well, to me, reading through their guidelines when I was researching all this, it was kind of like, I appreciate the holding up the HPC, but I don't really want to spend time doing that.
Right.
Just because, it happens to be 40 years old.
Right.
I mean, my house is beyond 40 years old.
Well, and that shows the challenge of a strict year-by-year standard in a community of older homes, whereas you get a particular community that doesn't have much redevelopment, in a relatively short period of time, most of the community is going to hit that threshold. And that may not be the choice expected by the residents nor expected by the council.
Yes, and some of us remember when the 50-year limit was on the front page of the Ojai Valley News. Fortunately, I wasn't sitting on this side of the table when that happened. Any other items that people want to bring up or questions? Yes.
I just want to thank you for the language on this. The last one, I had such a hard time. I'd read and I'd read it again, and the language is so cleaned up and tightened, and I just want to thank you for the work. And I love that there were so many different minds that came together, and there were no dissents, and everybody were able to. The best type of government is compromise and conversation, and I think it's a good document overall. So I want to just thank everybody who was involved.
Thank you very much. Again, going to the process, that meeting each week, meeting with the same set of people, having that common goal, not having it spread out over I mean, when I went through this list, and I have every, agenda item here, I was blown away that we had actually spent that much time, and again, having a variety of members, and just coming to a common thread, and then having 4 months or 6 months in between meetings, that we could solve all problems. Having a weekly meeting where we can email each other and get things done would be beneficial. But just in closing, again, to what you were just saying, Commissioner McCatton, our common thread was Commissioner DuPoit, who was our coach from the sideline and our fullback running down the field and dragging us all along with her. Too much football on TV lately. Can't believe I was rooting for Clemson. It's my daughter-in-law's arch rival. So anyway, thank you, Elise, for all of the work you did on that. It was fabulous. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I'm going to take Commissioner Convery's comment on keeping you in the loop on the minor permits to get that.
Thanks, and
Great.
maybe you want to take a look at the one person, one vote issue rather than the per parcel vote. I think that's a huge loophole for people. It's been proven.
Yeah, no, very good information. Thank you, Craig. The only way you could be doing better was if we expanded our HPC commission and we could get you back. Craig knows how many times I've asked him every time we have had a hole in our group. Thank you, Darwin, Commissioner McCready, for the 4 years you helped us limp through this and for being a part of the commission. And thank you to having Community Development Director Connolly. May health overcome him and his back and issues, and that he can join us. Yes.
Could you clarify again what the woman from the state recommended in the vote? I'm not quite following it.
Oh, she just said, no, that's not in keeping with the Secretary of the Interior standards.
But what
She said we needed to do it the way that it was written in the code before I
But what
made
is
that.
that way?
That way is I'll let Mr. Summers answer that.
So the way that's proposed here is within a historic district, it can be defeated by a majority protest. Majority is defined as majority of the owners of the parcels, where the owners of each parcel get 1 vote per parcel. So one person owns 1 parcel, they get 1 vote. A couple owns 1 parcel, they share 1 vote. You vote by parcel. The prior standard that was applied in the Taormina Historic District, which was approved by the City Council in 2016 or 17, was that it would be majority of the owners of the parcels, where we counted up the number of owners of all the parcels. So the one person who owns 10 parcels gets 1 vote, or one, in that case, corporation owns 10 parcels gets 1 vote, while the couple that owns a house gets 2 votes. It was there's merits on both sides. That was the prior standard that was applied. In the Taormina Historic District case, there was not majority protest, although one corporation that owns a significant portion of parcels was opposed. In this approach, as structured here, it would be simply count up all the parcels, and each parcel gets a vote as to whether or not to protest a proposed historic district. The comments from the state were that this 1 vote per parcel approach isn't consistent with the state standards, but they are just comments. The state doesn't have the power to reject, or doesn't have power over council to approve or reject the ordinance. And there's, as is noted, policy considerations and fairness considerations on both sides.
It used to be like if someone owed 10 parcels, they still only got 1 vote.
Correct.
Oh, and now they get a vote for each parcel.
And this proposal would switch it to be 1 vote. If they own 10 parcels, they would have 10 protest votes.
Oh, I just noticed the other day that there's somebody who owns 5 buildings in the arcade, and they're all being sold. One owner owns 5 stores that are being sold, so they would get, if we were gonna go for a district, they would get more vote, they would get 5 votes.
If this was structured and if the arcade was presented for a proposed historic district, then yes, that owner if they're sold to all an owner, this is the first time hearing of this particular sale. I don't watch all the real estate broker notices. If that person all 5 were bought by one person, then yes, that person would have 5 protest votes for the arcade parcels.
Yeah, and if there are 5 parcels for sale and the movie theaters for sale and God knows what else, and somebody wants to come along and snap up all this stuff before it's designated, they could really change the look of Ojai, with that 1 parcel per vote deal. So that's how I see it. Now watch it, Brian. That's how I see the negative approach. Yeah, it's an anti-preservation trick in a way.
As Commissioner DuPoint can point out, I am still getting roasted by the people in Terramina who oppose that historic district, aren't I? Yes. I was just trying to be fair.
What is the positive side you see to the way we have it now in the new, this?
This approach has a couple of, one is there's this, for what it's worth, there is significantly greater administrative convenience to 1 vote per parcel, in that the city, in assessing the protest votes, need only send a notice to the registered owner, that is the county listed owner of each parcel, and then wait for a response. Whereas before, the city was in a difficult position of determining both the numerator and the denominator when it's in the fraction that is a protest. So when we had the old system, we had to both send a notice to every listed owner of the properties, which is always the case for the historic district. We also had to then review the county's ownership records to figure out how many owners of parcels there were, to be able to know both of the numbers of the numerator, the number of protest votes that received, the denominator, the number of owners of parcels. As distinct from if it's 1 vote per parcel, the number of parcels is known. That's the map that would be the historic district as proposed, and then we just wait for the number of protest votes that come in. Now, that's just administrative convenience. That may not be a great concern, but it's worth mentioning. So that's an improvement element. The other is it's more of a base policy question. Is the focus on facilitating or making it more difficult to accomplish a protest vote, which is a policy choice that is best left to the electeds, such as the ones here or any of the electeds when it comes to council.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Summers. Any other questions? Again, thank you all. Thank you for this lengthy process. Thank you for those that came in and raised questions or suggestions. Appreciate that. And again, appreciate the work of everybody's here. If you have questions or if you are imposed of anything, then I would monitor when the item's going to come before the city council. Sherry, do you think you could send an email out to our commission? When
Yes. Also, February 12th, Tuesday, is your joint meeting with city council, and that's the night that the CEQA guideline is on the agenda.
Oh, thank you. I didn't have the date. Last thing, I'll note that staff will, of course, after perhaps a final review by the committee, take it to the council. And in that discussion, staff will explain to the council and the public the comments from tonight from the commission. So it won't go into either. The comments will be provided to council for their consideration.
Okay, great.
And an email as
Thank
well.
you. That'd be very much appreciated. Councilman Wyrick, thank you for being here. Craig, thank you for inviting him to be here. So, and for you to be here yourself. So that's how we were introduced at the beginning. So again, thank you all. We will now move on to item number 3. Do we have a staff report on item number 3? Suzanne? Yes.
So the meeting on February 14th, Thursday, has scheduled adaptive reuse. That would be following a council item on adaptive reuse. And then we have the budget, some brochures for the HPC brochures. Is that correct, Sherry? Yes. And then a discussion of whether or not to hold a reception for the Smith-Hobson family regarding the landmarking of this building. Pending projects coming forward, we have a potential to create an ad hoc committee to explore the definition of a historic district. And then the Ojai Playhouse RFP was circulated recommended by this commission on May 10th to circulate that RFP. It was circulated on October 8th. November 19th was the deadline for those submittals. We received 3 proposals. They were varying dollar amounts. It is tentatively scheduled for January 22nd at City Council, pending that Luke and I can finalize that report. So I will again let you know for sure if that will be on the January 22nd meeting. It looks like we have 3 items to discuss on the budget for the 2019-2020 budget: the Boyd Center, the library, and the Downtown Historic District.
And then one reminder that 2 days before your next meeting is that special joint meeting with City Council.
Yeah, February
At
12th.
6 o'clock
6 o'clock, okay.
for 1 hour,
6 o'clock?
from 6 to 7.
Can I ask a question, Sherry?
Yes.
Can we possibly meet about the brochures
Sure.
before then? Okay, thank you.
And having looked at the agendas from last year on February 14th, we were having a joint meeting with the city council. No offense to them, but I'd enjoy meeting with all of you on Valentine's Day. I would take my wife out to lunch. Oh, nice lunch. One of the action items, and I saw Mr. Vega pop in here, I don't know if he's monitoring us, was where we are on our budget. I called Rudy to ask him about that. Rudy is out on medical leave from December until February 4th, I think. So I left a message with Mr. Vega, so I will have that information for us by the time we're discussing it at the next meeting. I talked with Luke Connolly prior to the last meeting, and the goal is for he and I to get together and talk about what the agenda is going to be, so that I can bring up the issues, try to remember to bring up the issues. He can try to remember to bring up the issues, and hopefully we'll get them all listed on the future agenda items going out, so that we're not forgetting about any items that fall by the wayside. Okay, yes.
Elise had asked last month how to get something on the agenda. So if any of us find something, we should come to you and then just separately email you, not copy the whole commission. If she finds something that she wants on a future agenda, she would then email you, or I would email you if I saw something. Is that correct?
I'm going to look over to the man who led us for 4 years.
Okay. All right,
So,
thank you.
yes.
I thought it had to be two commissioners wanting it on the agenda.
I think that's only on the city council. Two members of the city council can actually put an item on the agenda that evening, or
Not that evening. The city council agenda is a little more regimented. The city council agenda is 2 members of the council or the mayor can put something on a future council agenda, or of course the full city council from meeting to meeting. For here, I'm not sure if we have an established policy. I believe in the past it has often been 2, but 1 plus the chair would be 2. So if one asked the chair could say, oh, yes. If the chair was opposed, then 2 could say, go get 2, and then still put it on.
that makes sense. I'm getting the nod over to the right, so, yeah. Good question, though, Elise.
And of course, in all cases, this commission, as is the council and every other public body, it's a 72-hour requirement for the agenda for public meetings.
Great, thank you. Let's see, planning report? Do you have a planning report for us, Suzanne? What's that? Thank you. Again, nice to have you here. Appreciate that very much. I enjoyed talking with you and appreciated you following up with the Community Development Director. Commission comments. We're on page 2.
Did we skip all the,
No, that future agenda items was number 3.
what happened to the
that's why I asked if you wanted something on the agenda, who you would contact.
Do you have a recommendation on an item or something?
What did you want to do?
Well, I thought we were already discussing some of these other things. I don't know why they're on featured instead of current. Anyway,
Well, the things we can take action on have to be listed on the agenda.
well,
We've already been talking about the Smith Hobson reception now for 2 or 3 months, I think, or 2
Right.
months at least. And we haven't voted, as this body, we haven't voted, do we want to have this? Do we have the budget for it? And do we want to ask the council if they would approve of it?
That's correct. And so we
Why-
discussed it, but we couldn't take action at the last meeting. And as in discussion with Suzanne in the notes that she had from Community Development Director Connolly, that was scheduled for February because they didn't believe there was enough staff time in order to prepare for that. And looking at the budget and the different items that were taking place with the holidays taking place. So that was put per Luke's notes, that was set for the February meeting.
Our meeting in February?
Yes,
It'll be
our-
on the agenda?
It will, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question for
yes.
Commissioner DuPois. Were you going to contact the Smith-Hobson family about dates before then? Did you?
I thought a lot about that, and I do not feel comfortable contacting them about this event till we agree as a body we're going to do it, we have the budget for it, and the council is backing us for it. I don't feel comfortable.
My confusion is that we couldn't have a budget until we decided how many people, et cetera, like a general budget, right? A general budget, not a specific budget.
I just think it'd be about $200.
That's, yeah.
We'll decide that in a month.
Good, that's fair.
We'll decide that on Valentine's Day.
Okay.
And then I think that would be, then depending on what we decide then, you could contact the Hobsons, if you would.
yeah,
Okay,
makes sense.
okay. Other commissioner comments? Staff? Anything you want to?
No, thanks again to the members of the ad hoc committee. It was very much appreciated, reviewing everything. It was much appreciated. Thank you.
Great. Anything else? No, everybody's got their purses in their hands. and
It's cold in here.
I've already texted my wife that I'm having to drive solo down to Ventura, but I might make it. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Freezing in here.
It was freezing when I came. It's future. We'll have to put it on the agenda because we want to take action. Well,